Welcome to lesson 3 for this week. We're going to continue reviewing our test to try and find ways to improve. Okay, so I don't mind if you print off your copy of my personal plan of how to improve my physics score, or you can just work on computer. That's absolutely fine. So I'm going to just work on the computer. So if you've identified that the problem that you had with the question was knowledge, then the next thing that you need to do is identify which piece of knowledge was a problem. So that's quite easy to do because if you look on here, it says, if it was question 1, it says SC 1 to 8 for energy. So those are the knowledge issues that you could have. So if you've printed it off, you can just tick this box. If you haven't printed it off and you're doing it on computer, it's probably easiest to just highlight that rather than try and tick that box. It's not really a ticky box. So that then tells me, right, I've got an issue with that piece of knowledge. So then you need to go on to the second page of this how to improve plan, and again it will depend whether you're typing or whether you're writing this out, but you need to actually create a list of facts basically that you need to know. So let's say on question 1 you didn't know that the 3 fossil fuels are coal, oil and gas, then you would put in the 3 fossil fuels are coal, oil and gas. And if you want to add pictures or highlight keywords maybe, or put keywords in bold, anything that you can do to make the information stand out, because especially if you end up with a really long list that just looks really boring, you're not going to remember it very well. So the more you can kind of do to make things stand out, the better really. So yeah, pictures and all things like that are all great, but do make it a list with bullet points, because again, putting information in chunks is much easier for your brain to remember. So that's what to do if it was a knowledge problem. Okay, so you might have looked at it and thought, actually, I knew all of the knowledge, I got all of the knowledge questions right, but I really struggled with, for example, I didn't use scientific language, or I didn't know how to use the graph, or I didn't understand how to calculate percentage, or even so deduction means being able to work something out. So I found it hard to sort of take the information and work out what was going on. So if there was a problem with any of these skills, so it does give you a list of all the possible skills you need on that question, you would tick whichever skill it was that you were missing. And you might find that there's more than one thing that you've got wrong. So you might be ticking knowledge and one of these, or you might be ticking lots of these, depending on how many things you got wrong in that question. But let's just say, for example, that you weren't able to use the graph. So let's say we've ticked use the graph. Let's then look at what we do on our plan sheet. Okay, so on here, this column here says science skills I need to brush up on. So let's say that it was using a graph that we had a problem with. So it's this that we're going to be highlighting, or remember you can tick. Now, if there's only one of the things you had a problem with, so you're fine at using diagrams, you're fine at using tables, but just graphs you couldn't do, you can just underline or highlight the specific thing in the list, okay? So for that one, there's nothing that you need to do on the next page. You just need to, we're just really making ourselves aware of, right, I need to do some work on graphing skills. Okay, so the last thing to think about is the kind of generic skills. They're not really science skills, they're just skills that might come up. So you might find that actually you knew all the science, but you didn't understand what you were being asked, in which case it would be question comprehension. It might be that you just made loads of silly mistakes and you didn't check back. It might be that you didn't follow the instructions of the question, so maybe it said tick 1 box and you ticked 2. It might be you didn't bother highlighting keywords and so you didn't quite get the right information. Or it might have even been your math skills or your English skills that were a problem. So if any of those things came up for you, then you need to tick them or highlight them on here. So let's say that it was that you couldn't work out the percentage, which you had to work out in question 1. So you would highlight math skills because it's a math skill rather than a science skill. Okay. And again, on that column, you don't have to do anything else down here because this is all just for knowledge. So it's really just making us aware of what skills we need to work on. Okay, and that would be you done with question 1. So you'd then be able to move on to question 2 and do exactly the same thing. So start with the knowledge column and check whether your knowledge was fine. If your knowledge wasn't fine, go to the second page and write a bullet point of the things that you need to remember. Then check the scientific skills column. Again, it tells you which skills were actually required by this question because not all questions require all skills. And then last of all, the general skills section. So do that for question 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 and 8. So all of the questions you're going to do that for. And once you've finished all of those, we can go on to the next section of our How to Improve plan. So you should now have filled out this section and hopefully, well, if you got lots wrong, you'd have a lot written in here. And if you hardly got anything wrong, you'd have less written in here. But what it will give you a good idea is if you don't have much written here, it tells you that actually your knowledge is great. But you might have a lot highlighted in these 2 sections, which tells you actually it's not your knowledge that's a problem. So you're revising fine, you don't need to do any more revision, but what you need to work on are your scientific skills or even just your general skills, your maths or your English, question comprehension, things like that. So it's really useful to pinpoint whether it's a problem with knowledge or skills or both, of course. So once we know that, we can then go on to write some targets. So we're going to write 3 targets. I think it's really important not to have too many because then it makes it really difficult to keep up with them. So we're going to try and pick targets that we can hopefully bring into play during the rest of this term. So your first target, your top target, needs to be the thing that probably lost you the most marks, the thing that's going to make the biggest impact if you change it. So you'd go back up to here and have a look. Now, if, for instance, you got loads of the knowledge wrong, then you probably want to focus your top target on something to do with knowledge. Now, it might be that you think there's a problem with the actual revision process, so you might give yourself a revision target. It might be actually you've revised fine, but in the actual lessons you were struggling so much that when you came to revise you were trying to learn it. So that means you need to think about what you can do in lessons. It might be to ask more questions for help. It might be to do a little revision session at the end of each week. It might be that you need to concentrate better in lessons. Let's be honest there, guys. So have a really good think about what your top priority is. If it's not knowledge based and you're taking it from this column, that makes it quite a lot easier because you can literally just pick one of these things and put it into here. Now, if let's say that your biggest problem that lost you the most marks was actually that you didn't know how to use the calculation triangles. You knew them, you can draw them, so it's not a knowledge problem, but you don't know how to use them. So in here you would put, the top thing I'm going to make sure I do is learn how to use the calculation triangles. Okay, and then you're going to do exactly the same thing for your second target and your third target. The last place your targets could come from is, of course, they could come from here. So let's say that actually you're really quite good at science, but your question comprehension isn't great, then that's going to be a target for us. So let's say the second most important thing I'm going to make sure I do is read the question carefully, highlighting key information to help me with question comprehension. So it's important that you actually say how you're going to get better. You can't just say, oh, I'm going to get better at question comprehension. So I've said that I'm going to read it carefully, and I've said that I'm going to highlight the key words to really help me understand the question. So really think about what it is that you're actually going to do. This needs to be a plan that you can actually implement. Okay, so that's you done with your targets. Now, the only point of writing targets is if we actually then use them. So what's really important is that you check back in with these targets every week. So I'd say at the beginning of each week of this term, read through these targets again and see if you can use them in what we're doing. Now, if it's really specific to physics, so for example, this one here, this is very specific to physics. So you're probably not going to be using that because we're going to be doing biology. However, if you've got one which is more generic, like this one, which is question comprehension, that's going to be relevant for biology. So you can then implement this target in your biology work. So it's not only going to improve your physics, it's actually going to improve everything. Okay, and that is you done with lesson 3 for this week. And that's us done with physics. So next week we'll be moving on to some biology. I'd like you to upload your improvement plan to Shobi. So if you go to week 1, you will see a assignment called Test Score and Review. If you could upload it there and anything else that you need to upload from this week.